Coming up on this episode, some quick Summer League thoughts as the Warriors win back-to-back games to start the California Classic, plus some more trade chatter on Lauri Markkanen, including 3 potential deals Golden State could make to land the 2023 All-Star. Welcome back to the Golden State with Mates podcast. Happy 4th of July weekend for those of you in America celebrating. Hope you've had some fun and are staying safe. But we've got some Warrior basketball back in action in the Summer League, starting here at the California Classic, where the Warriors have recorded back-to-back victories over the Miami Heat and Los Angeles Lakers. Not just back-to-back victories, but dominant blowout wins. First of all, coming on Saturday, 105-66, 39-point win over the Heat. And then I've just finished about half an hour ago watching this second matchup against the Lakers, where Golden State recorded a 92-68 victory there. So a great start, slightly underwhelming though, and a bit disappointing with the number of absences currently of key players that were going to play a big role, obviously, in Summer League, and still will later on, potentially in Vegas. But obviously, this roster was headlined by Brandon Podziemski and Trayce Jackson-Davis, both of whom a part of the Team USA Select team, who are currently in Vegas playing against and helping prepare the main USA team for the Olympics later this month. Talking of the Olympics, Guy Santos has been playing for Brazil, and they have now qualified for the Olympics, so congratulations to Guy there, who will undertake his first Olympic experience, which is absolutely fantastic. A couple others as well that are missing. Quentin Post, the 52nd overall pick, obviously from last month's draft. He is currently dealing with a foot injury, so he's yet to debut in the first 2 games. And Pat Spencer, who had 16 points, 5 rebounds, and 5 assists in the first game against the Heat, he also missed today's game. So quite a number of players that we're looking forward to watching in these games haven't quite made it to the court yet or are elsewhere. Obviously, Guy now will play for Brazil in the Olympics and probably won't be part of the Summer League roster whatsoever. But still some, excitement to take away from these contests. We've got, two-way contracted guard Reece Beekman, who's making his Warrior debut over these last 2 games. Pat Spencer we spoke about. And then other guys pushing for, to impress not just the Warriors, but elsewhere as well. And the Warriors have certainly done that over these past couple of games. Their defense has been absolutely outstanding, suffocating first the Heat and the Lakers, who both shot less than 30% from the field. The Lakers today playing without Bronny James, which again is a little bit disappointing. Obviously, huge buzz around him. Would have been fantastic to see him go up against the Warriors after he made his debut on Saturday. Only had, I think, 4 points and a couple of rebounds, couple of assists, 2 of 9 shooting in his debut. Missed with a slight injury against the Warriors today. But Dalton Connect, of course, the 17th overall pick, he did play today, and his performance really reflected that of his teams. He had, I think it was a team high 12 points, but shot just 3 of 13 from the field, 1 of 3 from 3-point range. Really struggled, obviously, with his efficiency, and that reflected the Lakers as a whole, who again shot less than 30% from the field. I think they were less than 12% from 3-point range. I think they were 4 of 34 or something like that. So an impressive start for the Warriors, who've got a lot of older guys with really good professional experience or a lot of G League experience. So it's no surprise here that they are, they have started really well. They sound like they had a good training camp kind of leading in to the California Classic, so hopefully they can continue this form. They've got a final game against the Sacramento Kings on Wednesday night, US time, and then, of course, off to Vegas as well. A couple of standout performances so far. I suppose Ethan Thompson, young 6'5" guard, 25 years old, he's been the standout over the first 2 games, 27 points on 10 of 15 shooting against the Heat, and then today against the Lakers, another 22 points to go with 11 rebounds. I think he had 4 assists and 3 steals as well in about 27 minutes. So very impressive from him. I suppose the only issue for these guys that are pushing to try and obviously get in the NBA is the dream for these guys, but the issue for Golden State at the moment is that they've got 15 guys on their roster contracted right now, if you include Quentin Post, who there hasn't been any. I don't think there's been a release, a media release that the Warriors obviously acquired his draft rights and have him, but I don't think there's actually been a release of what contract he's on, whether that will be a 2-way spot or whether it'll be on the main roster. But either or, you're either going to have him on the main roster or him on a 2-way spot alongside Reece Beekman and Pat Spencer. So at best, like these guys that are playing for the Warriors in Summer League right now, at best there's only one spot available. And that might not, like the Warriors might choose, I'm looking at the roster right now, and the Warriors really lack a backup point guard behind Steph Curry unless they're going to rely on Brandon Bajemski. And I'm looking at this and think, well, can they put Post on a two-way contract alongside Beekman and Spencer? There are a lot of two-way contracts. And then look at another free agent point guard. There's still some options on the table. Guys like Tyus Jones and Markelle Fultz you'd think would be out of the Warrior price range, but then the further free agency goes, who knows? Maybe a Spencer Dinwiddie. Kyle Lowry, I'm surprised he hasn't re-signed with the Sixers yet. You'd expect him to do that, but it hasn't been forthcoming. Maybe he's an option to really replace Chris Paul, obviously, as another veteran point guard, championship experience. We know doesn't put up great numbers these days, but if he's a backup to Steph for 10, 15 minutes a game, I think that would be perfect. So I'm looking at that, and I'm just wondering, like, it kind of takes a bit of the excitement out of Summer League, because I think if you go back, rewind 12 months ago, the Warriors really only had at this point 11, 12 players on their roster. The two-way contract spots hadn't necessarily been completely finalised, as they aren't yet. Like, they can always swap out two-way guys, as they did a couple of years ago. If you remember, I think Lester Quinonez was on a two-way spot. Might have been someone else was on a two-way spot, and then basically just before the season, they brought in Anthony Lamb and Ty Jerome on two-way spots, and those guys obviously went on to play significant minutes for the Warriors that season. So things can always change here, but right now there's like a real lack of roster opportunities or roster availabilities that are open for some of these guys to try and push for a spot, because Golden State, obviously, with their acquisitions of most recently Buddy Hield, and before that Kyle Anderson and D'Anthony Melton as well, they've got essentially a full roster here, depending on what obviously happens with Post, and then Guy Santos has got a non-guaranteed deal for next season as well, so he could always be waived to open up another spot, but I wouldn't have thought he'd be waived in order to bring in one of these Summer League guys, unless they like truly, truly impress. I'd be surprised if any of these guys are skipping over Guy Santos for a main roster spot. I just don't think that's going to happen. One player I was interested to see today who missed the game against the Heat but played today against the Lakers was former top 10 pick. Was he 9th overall? Kevin Knox II. He's been in the league. I think it was 2018, pick 9, I believe. Always been interested in his game just because 6'7", good size, could theoretically shoot the ball a little bit, pretty good athlete. He was disappointed today. He was active. He did a lot of stuff. He played 19 minutes off the bench, finished with 7 points. I think he had 4 rebounds, 5 assists. Did a lot of things, but some of the shot selection, some of the decision-making on offense wasn't great. Shot just 3 of 10 from the floor. He was certainly putting shots up while he was out there. There's no doubt about that. But not necessarily the standout performance you would want from him. He's obviously got a lot of time here over the rest of Summer League to try and push his case, but he's someone with more than 4 years of NBA experience. He won't be able to go on a two-way contract. So again, he's fighting for a main roster spot, and it'd be difficult to envisage him getting a gig over Guy Santos, or potentially, filling a 15th spot if Quinton Post goes on a two-way. I just don't see too many guys as impressive as the Warriors have been over these first two games. I'm just projecting forward and looking at the Golden State roster, and it's hard to see too many of these guys having an impact for the Warriors next season, if at all, really. So hopefully come Las Vegas, we might get to see a bit of BP and Trace, and hopefully, I'm not entirely sure what's going on with Quinton Post's injury, but fingers crossed he can get that right, and we might be able to see him. Even if you go back 12 months ago, like I remember all the hype around TJD, and remember he had an injury as well, which saw him miss the start of the California Classic and then the start of Summer League, and I think he came back for the last 2 games, and he was really impressive in the last 2 games, and I think it got fans excited to think, well, if he can do this off an injury and just, play like he did in those 2 games, that's a sign of something to potentially, come going into the season. And of course, that's what happened. He was absolutely outstanding. Pretty unlucky to miss the All-NBA rookie second team, I would have thought. And being the top 10 rookies there, he was one of the most impressive players, obviously coming as the 57th overall pick. So hopefully we might get to see something of Quinton Post. Again, I think I said on last episode or the episode before, you don't want to have the expectations on Quinton Post that he's going to deliver something like Trace Jackson Davis did last season. but nonetheless, it would be exciting to see him play depending on how that foot injury goes. I want to move on from Summer League and into some more Lauri Markkanen chat. Been a few days since the last episode. Nothing too much has come out, which is, I suppose, a little bit disappointing given I think there was a time there, probably about a week ago nearly now, maybe 4 or 5 days ago, where we thought that there could be something imminent, that we were kind of just waiting for the tweet from Woj or Shams suggesting that, Lauri Markkanen has been traded to the Golden State Warriors. Hasn't been forthcoming at this stage, and I suppose the longer it goes, the more kind of pessimistic we might get, and that was certainly more so the case as well with a report from The Athletic's Anthony Slater today, who was kind of looking at the Kings sign and trade for DeMar DeRozan yesterday, which he also mentioned their pursuit of Lauri Markkanen last week. Of course, earlier, Yahoo Sports' Jake Fisher had reported last week that the Kings were pretty close to a deal for Markkanen. That didn't end up being the case, and obviously since then they've pivoted to get DeMar DeRozan, which, just quickly on that, I think it's an interesting acquisition because he's clearly a good player. Like, he's a better player than Harrison Barnes, who the Kings sent out. He goes to the Spurs in this 3-team sign and trade. Better player than Harrison Barnes. No one's doubting that. But as a Warrior fan, like, Kings obviously, one of our biggest rivals in the Pacific. 4 games against them next season. I do question the fit somewhat in terms of offensively. Obviously, you've got 3 kind of shot makers, shot creators there in Fox, DeRozan, and Sabonis, and even 4 if you want to include Malik Monk, who obviously re-signed. But those guys kind of need the ball in their hands to be effective, and particularly DeRozan and Sabonis. I mean, Sabonis, yes, can play in the pick and roll and whatever else, but he's best with the ball in his hand as a facilitator from the post and whatever else. And DeRozan, again, is a guy, he's not a catch-and-shoot threat from the outside necessarily. So I just wonder how those guys fit together, given that, like, they kind of need the ball in their hands. Sabonis isn't extending to three-point range. DeRozan isn't extending to three-point range. Well, at least not at a high level, and not at a high volume, not at a great efficiency necessarily. So I'm wondering how those guys fit together offensively. As talented as they are, there's no doubt about that. And also defensively, DeRozan not the greatest defender. Obviously, there's been issues with Sabonis as that genuine rim protector, and whether he can be that guy, particularly come playoff times. If the Kings want to have any hope of going deep into the playoffs or making it first and foremost, of course they missed last season after beating the Warriors in the playing game, and then losing to they lost to the Pels in the final game to see them miss out. So they're going to be like the Warriors. They're going to be pushing for a playoff berth again, and they're making this deal to try and go, not all in necessarily, because they haven't given up too much. It's Harrison Barnes. It's certainly an upgrade to get DeMar DeRozan, but I'm just wondering, like, if I was them, I would have preferred Markkanen. And again, the price would have been a lot different. You'd be giving up a lot more for Markkanen. But if the Warriors can land Markkanen, I feel, even despite the addition of DeRozan, I feel comfortable that the Warriors can be a better team than the Kings next season, pending health and stuff like that as well. So an interesting pickup. It does probably help the Warriors in the fact that it takes potentially, and I say this because the Kings, there's still a move they could make to get Lauri Markkanen and actually add Markkanen alongside Fox, Sabonis, DeRozan, and Monk. That would be a serious team, and there's still room for them to do that. Now, whether they want to give up Keegan Murray or not, we'll wait and see. It sounds like in their dealings with the Jazz last week, they didn't want to give up Keegan Murray, and that's why a deal probably didn't get too far down the road. Obviously, most of these deals are heavily pick-based at the moment, which is also, I think, the Athletics, who was it, Tony Jones, I think, reported that the Warriors have a substantial offer on the table as well for Markkanen that's heavily picks-based. So I'm assuming that's suggesting that Jonathan Kuminga is off the table at this point, and we'll wait and see. When it comes down to the crux of it, will Golden State be willing to give up Kuminga? Would the Kings be willing to give up Keegan Murray? That's really what it could come down to. But yeah, Slater today reporting on the Kings' acquisition of DeRozan, and also in that reporting that there's growing skepticism, quote, that Danny Ainge will be prepared to move off Markkanen in the coming weeks. So that's a bit disappointing, and where the Warriors kind of go from there and how long they're willing to wait on Markkanen. Like, it sounds like the Kings had a deadline in place with the Jazz and said, you know what, if we're going to make a deal, we need to make it at this point, and if you guys aren't willing to make it, we're going to turn our attention elsewhere. And that's ultimately what happened. That deadline kind of passed. Danny Ainge didn't flinch a muscle, and the Kings said, okay, we'll go out and look at DeMar DeRozan, and they made that happen pretty quickly. So if you're the Warriors, do you put a similar deadline in place and say, you know what, we need to do a Markkanen deal here in the next week, and if we don't, we might move on, see if we can get our hands on Brandon Ingram, someone like that, someone who's going to be a lesser quality, a lesser fit than Markkanen. But if they ultimately don't think that Markkanen is gettable, then maybe they do move on and they look at someone else. Maybe they, go back to the Bulls and ask about Zach LaVine, who is still kind of getting some speculation that there's some interest there from the Warriors, which is interesting. Obviously, going back to last week or whatever, just before Chris Paul was waived, there was the reports that Golden State turned down the deal that would have seen them get LaVine for CP3 and Andrew Wiggins. There's, again, some speculation that they might still have interest even though they declined that trade. I just don't see how that would work. I'm just not giving up Wiggins for LaVine. They both got 3 years left on their deal. It's just not a move I'd much prefer, much more palatable to have Wiggins on 3 years, 84, 85 million, than LaVine on 3 years, near 140. I think LaVine could be a better player going forward, particularly for what the Warriors need in terms of that secondary offensive scoring next to Steph. But it's going to create some holes defensively. There's no doubt about that. And if you look at the Warrior roster right now, there's a heap of 2 guards, which Zach LaVine is, and there's very few in the way of small forwards. You're basically looking at Wiggins and Moses Moody, 2 guys that are heavily on the trade block at the moment. From a Warrior standpoint. So if you get rid of 1 or 2 guys, you're obviously lacking depth there a little bit. So I just wouldn't do that trade. And then outside of that, I don't know how the Warriors would get LaVine. What contracts are you throwing together to get to over, $43 million? So I'd just be hugely surprised if that happened. But maybe Ingram, maybe he's a player that's a little bit more relevant. I still don't really see that as a fit. And we saw what happened to Brandon Ingram at the World Cup last year under Steve Kerr as head coach, where he had a really bad time and essentially by the end of it wanted to pack up and go home by the sounds of it. So I'm not sure the Warriors are going to be too thrilled about bringing in Brandon Ingram, and I'm not sure Brandon Ingram would be necessarily thrilled to play under Steve Kerr after his experience at the World Cup. We'll wait and see on that one, but I do think the Warriors are kind of putting all their eggs in the Markkanen basket, and as a result, they're willing to wait. And I think it was really interesting to see or read NBA insider Mark Stein's piece over the weekend, when he kind of went into more so Markkanen's contract details and the kind of nuances around that, which was really interesting and kind of suggests to me that the Warriors can probably wait another month here and we'll get far more clarity on what Utah want to do with Lauri in the next month, because he is extension eligible as of August 6th, right? But the interesting thing with that is if they do re-sign him with the thought that they are still going to trade him down the track. Now, first of all, they can't trade him for 6 months after they extend him. But then 6 months from August 6th is February 6th, and that is the February mid-season deadline. That is deadline day. And so, therefore, if they want to trade Lauri Markkanen mid-season, they have to ensure they do an extension on August 6th for him to be eligible to be traded right in the final 24 hours before the deadline on February 6th. So that's super fascinating. Because, otherwise they could not extend him and they could just play this out. But I'm not sure why they would, because the further they play it out without actually extending him, then the greater threat there is that he could just wait it out himself, not sign anything and leave as an unrestricted free agent next season. I think the Jazz, if they're going to move him, they're going to want full value for him. And the absolute full value you're probably going to be able to get is extend him. So he's got basically 4 or 5 years or whatever left on his contract, and then trading him at the mid-season deadline, where teams are going to, again, line up to get him, especially if we basically know that, hey, this guy's going to be available on deadline day. So it would make for a very interesting final 24 hours of the trade period. There's no doubt about that. But I think that's how they would get max value. The issue is for the Jazz, and this is why I remain somewhat hopeful and somewhat optimistic, glass half full, that they might actually trade him before they extend him, is that if they extend him and then they have to wait 6 months before they trade him and wait till February 6th. Well, February 6th is like 50 games into the season, right? And there's a chance by that point that the Jazz have racked up, I don't know, 20 to 25 wins, let's say, with Markkanen, playing as he has done the last couple of seasons, averaging over 23 points a game. And by that point, they might be out of the picture to get like a real bottom seeding to get, access to high draft picks and a strong chance in the lottery. And that's the issue for the Jazz. And that is the entire reason, like people asking why they wanting to trade a guy the caliber of Lauri Markkanen. Well, here's a guy who is a top 20, 25, top 30, whatever you want to say, player in the league. But he's not a top 10 player in the league. No, I don't think anyone's arguing he's a top 10 player in the league. And to be really good in this league, right, to be a superstar caliber team, to be a championship caliber team, you need a top 10 guy, essentially. Now, the Celtics are probably the closest thing. Like, Tatum's probably the end of the top 10. Maybe he's outside the top 10, he's 11 or 12. Either way, he's close to that mark kind of thing. And we know, obviously, how well-rounded the Celtics roster is. But if you go back through, like, obviously, Jokic the year before, Curry the year before that, Giannis the year before that, LeBron the year before that, like, it goes, Kawhi in 2019, the Warriors years with Steph and KD. Like, clearly history that shows you need a minimum a top 10 guy, probably a top 5 guy to win a championship. And Lauri Markkanen doesn't project as that player for the Utah Jazz. And then as a result, what's their best way of actually going to get a guy who could be top 5, top 10 player in the league? Well, clearly for a slightly smaller market team like Utah, it's through the draft. And so really to get access to a guy who could project, obviously it's a risk, like, nothing, in the draft is a given, but to potentially get, Cooper Flagg as the number 1 pick next year, you can't really have Lauri Markkanen on your roster because he's going to help you win games. He's going to help you win games, and therefore you're going to finish with the 8th or 10th pick in the draft, right? Which could still get you a solid player. Maybe you get really lucky and you get a guy who actually does develop into a top 10 guy in the league. But ultimately, you want a top 3 pick, hopefully the number 1 pick, particularly in a strong draft like next year. And so the Jazz are in a bit of a tough spot where it's, well, to get maximum value for Lauri, like, we probably need to extend him and then trade him at February 6th, but then February 6th is going to be too late for them to, like, tank next season. Like, what are they going to do? Ask him to sit out, essentially? Like, ask him to sit plenty of games at the start of the next season? Like, you're not going to do that. And so February 6th comes around, they might be in a spot where it's like, well, we want to trade Lauri Markkanen because we want to get a top pick, but we've actually waited too long here. He's helped us win 20, 25 games, and we no longer have the ability, unless we get really, really fortunate in the lottery, which can happen. We saw the Hawks this season, like, they jumped from 10 to 1, like, it can happen. But I think Utah want to try and make their chances of, landing that 1 pick as high as possible, essentially, and Lauri Markkanen's not going to help them do that. So that's why I still have some hope here that maybe they do trade him in the next month, and it's going to be like we're going to know either way, because I think the last thing that will happen is the Jazz just continue to kick this down the road, don't extend Lauri Markkanen, which yes means he remains eligible to be traded, but also means he's getting closer and closer to free agency. And the last thing you want to do for Utah is, if you don't give him a contract and he's like, well, hang on, why are you not giving me a contract? And like, that's a clear indication that, oh, we're still considering trading you, kind of thing. Then like, that could piss him off. And again, maybe he leaves for nothing in free agency in now less than 12 months. So I think that's the last thing that will happen. It'll either be he gets traded before August 6th, or they extend him on August 6th, or yeah, it should be that date exactly. Maybe it's a couple of days later, but again, if it's a couple of days later, that means he's not trade eligible until the next off season, so another 12 months. But either way, we're going to know by August 6th. We're going to know, and that's why I think the Warriors can be willing. Like, if Zach LaVine's on the table, I don't think Zach LaVine's going to get traded in the next month. Right, I think the Warriors can still go back to the Bulls as a backup plan and say, okay, let's renegotiate, see what we can do here, which I don't think is necessarily going to happen, but I think that option would be on the table. And so if I'm the Warriors, I'm just waiting it out, seeing what the Jazz want to do, almost calling their bluff and saying, okay, Danny, we've got to nearly August 6th. What do you want to do? Do you want to extend this guy? And then your chances of tanking next season are nearly out the window potentially, or do you want to trade him now? And the Warriors are going to have a strong offer on the table. There's no doubt about that. But it might be the difference between, trading Kuminga or not. And I think if you're a Warrior fan, you'd probably be willing to wait. Like, it's 7th of July now for those of you in the States, 8th for me. I think you'd be willing to wait another 3 or 4 weeks if it means you get Markkanen for a slightly lower price. Because it gets to August 6th and Danny's like, no, actually, I really kind of want to try and tank next season and get a top pick. I really want to do that, and I can't do that if I extend this guy. And I also don't want to not extend him and potentially lose him for nothing in free agency next season. So that's probably, I'd be willing to wait. It sounds like the Kings weren't. I'd be willing to wait for the Warriors because I think there is a deadline here, which is August 6th, where something's going to happen either way. But also because Markkanen's worth it. I think he's worth it in terms of how good a player he is. Again, not a top 10 guy, and that's exactly why I think the Jazz might move on from him. But a guy who can probably be the second best player on a championship team if Steph Curry is still at a top 10 level next season. And I think, with Markkanen on the roster again, if you keep Kuminga, you've got Draymond, depending obviously what else happens. But I think you've got the nucleus of a team that can, be in the top 6 in the Western Conference and potentially get up into the top 4 maybe even, hopefully get to the conference semi-finals, who knows, it's some kind of deep playoff run. We'll wait and see, but I think that's worth it. I just wanted to go through a few trade proposals here that were suggested or proposed last week by Clutch Point's Brett Siegel. I think it's worth going through and seeing what kind of offers could be on the table here for the Warriors. So I was going to rank these kind of from least favourable to most favourable, just from a Golden State perspective. If the Jazz were willing to do all these trades, which one would the Warriors prefer to do? So the first one, the least favourable one for me, would be Kuminga, Moody, Gary Payton II, 2025 and 2028 first round picks, then 2027, 2029 pick swaps for Markkanen and Walker Kessler. The Kessler part of this intrigues me because Utah, you've also got to suggest, and I'll go through a couple of the other options here in the last 2 trades as well, but they've got some other guys on their roster who are intriguing and who you'd think they're probably going to be willing to give up if the price is right. So there's a chance here that the Warriors could trade for a couple of players, not just Markkanen, particularly given Markkanen's on $18 million. So there is a chance here that the Warriors could get another guy on a reasonable deal, and maybe in combination it's 25, 30, $35 million, and the Warriors can get to that mark rather than, obviously, we've been talking about Levine on $43 million, and before that it was Paul George trying to get to $48 million for him. So Kessler's an interesting part. I spoke about him a few episodes ago after it was reported that he was potentially available. I think that was Jake Fisher of Yahoo Sports as well. And, he's 7'1", shot blocker, fantastic first couple of seasons. Not a great offensive player by any means. He's really just going to be TJD. He's going to be a slightly bigger version of Trace Jackson-Davis, and that gives you 2 young guys, obviously, who you can throw in the front court and basically have your center minutes assorted there. Obviously, there's going to be the small ball minutes of Draymond Green. There's going to be minutes where Lauri Markkanen, if he's a Warrior, he'd be playing at center. And so, as a result, you're obviously not going to be able to have TJD and Walker Kessler, on the floor together at any one time. You're not going to be able to do that. And given the Warriors' best lineup might be Draymond and Lauri at the 4-5, I wonder, whether it'd be worth having both TJD and Walker Kessler, coming off the bench. I'm not sure that's a great... if it means you've got to give up a lot more value to actually get Kessler in the trade, which in this one is you're giving up Kuminga and Moody, you're giving up your 2021 lottery picks, who you've developed time into. Kuminga was obviously outstanding in the second half of the season. And I'm not sure Kessler has that much value to the Warriors where they should be giving up extra stuff in order to get him. And so that's why I didn't really love this trade. I like Walker Kessler as a player. There's no doubt about that. I just think for the Warriors, it's if we're getting Markkanen, our starting lineup has probably got Markkanen and Green at the 4-5. Therefore, TJD is coming off the bench. We don't also need Walker Kessler in that situation. And then, I mean, in this deal as well, you're not giving up Kevon Looney, and that's probably where I'd probably give up. If you're getting Kessler back, you need to give up Looney instead of Payton, because I think in that situation, like, you can't have Draymond, Lauri Markkanen, Kyle Anderson, TJD, Walker Kessler, Looney. Like, you can't have all these options because Looney just wouldn't play. They'd be struggling to find minutes for both, like, TJD and Kessler. Like, it doesn't really make too much sense to me. Again, if you're giving up Looney instead of Payton, then maybe there's a pathway there. But even then, at the end of the day, like, the Warriors should be trying their best to not have Kuminga in the deal. And I think that's why this trade's been proposed, where it's like, okay, you're giving up Kuminga, but I'm also, like, giving you Walker Kessler as well, who's a nice young player in return. So there's kind of a deal in place there that is realistic. It's certainly realistic. But I think from a Warriors standpoint, it'd be the least favourable of these three. The second one, so it was removing Kuminga, and it was Pods, GP2, and Looney, along with 2025 and 2028 first round picks swaps in 2027 and 2029 for Markkanen straight up. I'd probably do this trade. It's not my favourite out of the three, but I'd probably do it from a Warriors standpoint. And I think it's perhaps the most realistic. It's probably the most realistic. I think if you're looking at the three that Siegel proposed here, I think the one I just mentioned with Kuminga, I think the Warriors might say no to that. I think the next one I'll do, the Jazz will probably say no to that. But I think one's probably the most realistic, where you're getting 2 first-round unprotected picks, you're getting 2 first-round pick swaps, and you're getting a guy who was a 19th overall pick last year whose value has only increased from that point. Obviously, all NBA rookie first team last season. I think that's a pretty good deal for both teams, if I'm being honest. And maybe that's... there's always some Warrior bias from me. Perhaps that's just innate, probably. And, if there's Utah fans watching this, let me know if you'd be willing to take that deal, or any deal that doesn't include Kuminga for that matter. But I think that's pretty fair. That's pretty fair, I think, that deal. And I can't really see... Yeah, I mean, the Jazz are going to ask for Kuminga. There's no doubt about that. And maybe that's the difference in the end. Maybe they just say no to this trade. But I do think there's a middle ground to be found. And this could be the middle ground where it's like, okay, we're not going to give you Kuminga. We're going to give you Pods. I think from a Golden State standpoint, you've just got to look at it and think, Pods is really good. He's really good, and he's going to be a big part of the team next season if he doesn't get traded. Could be the backup point guard behind Steph Curry. Could be running the second unit without Steph for 15, 20 minutes a game. Like, that's huge, right? That's a big part of your team. But I also think he doesn't have the absolute high-end upside, and that's the issue here. And I've spoken about it with people. It's like, you could give up Kuminga for Markkanen, right? And Markkanen's a better player right now, and Markkanen's a better fit for the Warriors right now, no doubt about that. But you could look back at it, and within 2 years, Jonathan Kuminga could be a better player than Lauri Markkanen. And that's the issue. That's the issue, and that's why the Warriors shouldn't be giving up Kuminga for Markkanen. Now, is that likely to happen? Probably not. Like, maybe there's a 20% chance that Kuminga's a better player than Lauri Markkanen in 2 years. Maybe only 20%. But that's still a quarter of a chance, I suppose. Like, there is a chance, right? There is a chance that Kuminga could be better than Markkanen. And so if you're talking about giving up Kuminga and, like, access to 4 future first-round picks, that's just overs, in my opinion. That is overs, in my opinion. That would smell of desperation from a Golden State standpoint. Now, if you're talking about Pods instead of Kuminga, I just don't think there's any chance that Brandon Podziemski's ever better than Lauri Markkanen. I just don't think there is. I think he's a great player. I think he's going to be a really high-end role player. But are we talking about a guy who's going to be a top 20 player in the league, top 25 player in the league at any point in his career? I'd love to be proven wrong. I hope he stays at the Warriors, and I hope he develops into a top 25 player in the league. I hope he develops into an all-star. I just don't think there's the upside there, the absolute high-end talent to suggest that Brandon Podziemski is going to be a top 25 player in the league. I think we can see that with Kuminga. Kuminga's level of athleticism, the way he's, like, unstoppable at the rim, the way he's kind of developed his mid-range jumper over the last couple of seasons. Like, there's a long way to go here. No one's arguing that. But his second half of the season suggested, okay, this guy, can average over 20 points a game, could average perhaps up to 25 points a game. And that's what Markkanen's doing. And so the last thing you want to do is give up Kuminga and, 4 future first-round picks, essentially, and then turn around in 2 years and, the guy we just traded away is actually better than the guy we brought in. That's the last thing you want to do. And I just think the Warriors don't necessarily want to take that risk, as there's less risk involved with Pods, because I just don't think he's going to get to the Markkanen level, right? I just don't think that. And then the third trade is an interesting one as well. So it's Wiggins, Moody, first round unprotected picks in 2025 and 2027, pick swaps in 2026 and 2029, from Lauri Markkanen and Jordan Clarkson. Interesting. So Clarkson for me, like, he's going to have some value, like, pretty good contract, I think. What is he, 2 years, like 29 million or something like that? Pretty good deal, will have some value. I'd imagine Utah might want to move on from him. Had an okay season in terms of numbers last season, but his efficiency wasn't good. I think he was less than 30% from three-point range or something like that. The efficiency wasn't great. I don't think the Warriors, like, in terms of, like, needing scoring off the bench, like, they just added Buddy Hield. I just don't think you're going to add Jordan Clarkson to a plethora of guys. Like, the Warriors are deep right now. They just don't really need a guy like Jordan Clarkson. Like, you've just got Buddy Hield, who's a guy that can come off the bench, hit a number of threes, have, potential 20-point games, have, average, 12, 15 points a game, something like that. The need for Clarkson isn't necessarily there. However, like, if you're saying Wiggins, Moody, and the picks, like, Wiggins, Moody, and the picks is a lot better than, like, giving up Pods or Kuminga. It just is. And so this is, like, certainly, if I was to do a deal, this is the deal the Warriors should want to make. I just don't see, like, why is Danny Ainge essentially doing Wiggins instead of Kuminga? And, you got to pay Wiggins another 3 years. Like, I just don't know why he would necessarily do that. It just doesn't make any sense. So I don't think Utah would go for it. The other thing with Wiggins, which I spoke about on last episode, is that if you're keeping Markkanen and if you're keeping Kuminga and adding Markkanen, like, you're going to have to pay those two guys big extensions this offseason, and then therefore Wiggins pretty much has to go by the end of next season, and you don't want to be paying him the last 2 years of his contract. It just wouldn't be financially viable. The Warriors should try and get out of that now, I'd imagine, rather than kind of backing themselves into a corner and kind of being forced to trade him. And if they can't trade him to a team and try and get out of that contract, then they're going to be above the second apron, I'd imagine, stuff like that. So they'd be in a bit of trouble there, and they'd have to give up further assets the longer it kind of goes. Unless Wiggins was to have a bounce-back season, and then maybe that would kind of, it'd be all null and void in that scenario, and maybe you keep Wiggins in that scenario, or at least it's, you can trade him to a team with cap space or something like that, a lot more easier than what you currently could at this point. Where again, like, if you were to move him in a separate deal, that wasn't included in Markkanen, then you would have to give up future assets, and the Warriors are giving up their future assets for Markkanen. So how you go about that? If you can double up and say we're getting out of Wiggins' contract while in the same deal as getting Markkanen, then maybe that's the best way to go about it. Again, I don't think Utah are going to do that. Maybe there's a third team that could get involved somewhat. I think I've seen one on Twitter where it was like Bruce Brown going back to Utah and Wiggins going to Toronto, and I don't know, but that's certainly the best deal for the Warriors. I don't think there's any doubt about that, because you're keeping Kuminga and Pods, and you're keeping TJD as well. So you've got really a core 4 guys there in Markkanen, Kuminga, Pods, and TJD, where you can say to yourself, we're going to be able to kind of protect these future picks with our on-court play to remain competitive, to remain around a playoff team, and not necessarily make these picks, top 10, top 5, top 3, because it could really come back to hurt you. And this is all things Mike Dunleavy and the Warriors have got to look at here. Is how's our team going to look when we give up this first round pick swap in 2029 in 5 years' time? Maybe we're giving up pick 1, and maybe it's a guy the caliber of Victor Wembanyama. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine in 5 years the Warriors have got the number 1 pick, and there's a guy like Victor Wembanyama, except we've actually got to give this pick to the Jazz. So this is the thing, and I think this is where patience really comes into it, I suppose, because it's easy for us to say, just give up this pick in 5 years' time. Doesn't matter. Let's do it now for Steph. It's easy to say, but obviously Joe Lacob is the owner. He's wanting a product post Steph Curry, and you don't want to be giving up a superstar caliber player who you could potentially build your team around for a guy who, yes, as good as Lauri Markkanen is, he's not a top 10 player in the league. So it's a tough one, and it's obviously what the Warriors are going to be battling with right now. And I think they are going to be ultimately willing to give up the pick so long as they don't have to give up Kuminga. But again, it's a wait and see game. I also, just on the Clarkson thing, I'd actually prefer to go for Colin Sexton, who I think in this deal you could actually swap Clarkson out for Sexton. The deal would still work, I think, or maybe like the Warriors throw in another like a Guy Santos or something like that to try and get the finances. I think it's about right though. I think Sexton's making about $18 million. He would intrigue me. He would intrigue me as a backup to Steph. Now, he wouldn't like it. Colin Sexton wouldn't like it because he'd probably be limited to playing 15, maximum 20 minutes a game, which I think he's a better player than that. And he, at this point of his career, he'd want more opportunity. But just as a pure backup to Steph, I think that'd be nice. Like another shot creator, another shot maker, had a pretty good season. So that would probably... If there was kind of a Wiggins trade where you're taking back, more salary than just Markkanen, then I'd probably prefer Sexton over Clarkson. Although neither of which are necessarily, like, there's too many two guards at the moment. Again, I think Sexton as a pure point guard would make some more sense. But again, if you're going to talk about a bench that's got, Colin Sexton, let's say Melton starting, Colin Sexton, Brandon Pajemski, Buddy Hield. Like, how does that go? How do you make the minutes work where those guys are all playing extensive minutes? And then in that deal as well, you still got Gary Payton II, right? GP2, you've also just traded for Lindy Waters III. Like, there's a plethora of options in the backcourt right now, and that's all the more reason why the Warriors need to make a consolation. That's not the word. But anyway, consolidation. Consolidation is the word. Consolidation trade here where they trade probably 3 for 1. Like 3 players in a deal for Lauri Markkanen or whoever it may be. And I think those players are probably like, if it's just GP2, Looney and Moody, really. Like GP2, Looney, Moody and the picks for Markkanen. Like that, I think that would be my ideal trade. I think that would be my ideal trade. Again, do Utah go for it? Probably not, but we'll wait and see. Other than that, guys, we'll finish it up. Another longish episode. I do pretty well just to sit here and talk crap for 40 minutes, but hopefully you guys got some entertainment and education out of it. Last thing before I go, I've just started up a community on Reddit, Golden State W Mates. Had a couple of comments talking about it'd be great to have a channel to talk all things Warriors basketball, so I thought I'd start that up. I'll leave a link in the description. You can go join there. Started a couple of posts already, just trying to create some discussion on the Warriors, obviously, and the NBA in general as well. So it'd be great if you could join that. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel already, that'd be greatly appreciated. You can follow me at POK252, that's POK252, on Twitter/X. And other than that, I'll see you in the next episode.